this is going to be a ban list review in the context of White Forest and what it means for the positioning of White Forest. So if you're new to the channel or you need a refresher, I try to avoid the generic content. There are many Yugi tubers who have already given their ban list reactions or their ban list thoughts, and I want to talk a little bit more specifically about White Forest and going into the Rage of the Abyss meta. So that will be the context for this video. Now, first of all, let's cover the ban list. So in the Forbidden section, we have Lacrima, which I didn't expect because it's a new card. I thought that they were going to hit Closed Heaven because it was also a common, and because they have not hit Closed Heaven, that means that Fiendsmith White Forest is absolutely one of the best versions of White Forest. There's no question about it. You don't have to play it, so if you're a budget player, don't worry, but it definitely is an extremely viable option. And we still 100% have access to the Necroquip line, the standard thing where you turn 2 bodies into the Closed Heaven, and that goes into Requiem, and then you go into the Necroquip, and that can turn into, for example, the Wave Hiking Caesar. So I think that with Apollousa being banned, this is actually quite relevant for us that Closed Heaven wasn't hit and Lacrima was, because Apollousa was, as I've shown in previous combos, something that you could make on Summon 5 even without using a normal summon, and that was relevant for protecting parts of our combo. Now obviously Apollousa is a generic card and lots of decks were using it, like Snake Eyes mid-combo to protect themselves too, so that wasn't specific to us. But I do think that making Closed Heaven on, like, for free actually, especially depending on the variant you're playing, like if you're playing the Millennium cards and you go for the Fiendsmith line, you can make Wave Hiking Caesar and force the nib or negate the nib. And that seems pretty good because you haven't committed the rest of your engines yet to your play. So that's worth thinking about. Now, a couple other super relevant things for White Forest. Beatrice was banned. Okay, yes, I thought that that was going to happen like most people did. And so I wasn't testing all the gimmicky combos. But here's the thing that is actually relevant for us. Hot Red is banned. And the gimmick puppet cards, I believe, are limited in a way that makes them unable to FTK. Now, why does this matter for White Forest? So, on the Omega ladder, for example, if you were playing a Breaker build, you basically had to concede that if you lost the dice roll to the Calamity decks, or the Crimson Dragon decks, that's really what they were, like Pure Centurion or the White Forest Calamities deck, which could be Millennium, using the Millennium cards to go into Crimson or whatever. Those decks making Calamity that would Calamity you in your standby phase, or if they didn't have a good hand and they had to wait until the main phase, they would still Calamity lock you unless you draw like very particular cards. That and the gimmick puppet stuff, you just had to lose those games. Like if you lost the dice roll, you were losing game 1. And then you had to win game 2 just for a chance to side properly into game 3 to not be FTK'd again. So I'm not saying that the Breaker version of White Forest will become the best version, but I'm saying that it is now a lot more playable than it was before because you don't have these auto-lose matchups. So even though we don't get to play a Calamity, which we didn't have to play anyhow, or if you're a Centurion player, you don't have to play that. Like OCG hasn't had that card for a while and they just play Double Blazar instead, which is not once per turn. I think this is very good for us, and now we can reconsider the Breaker version if we want. That's obviously meta dependent and probably going to be based on how good we think Breakers are against Tenpai and Yubel, which I'm thinking are going to be the best decks. Anyhow, Apollousa being banned probably is most relevant for Snake Eyes because that was absolutely core in their combo, even though it's a generic card. I think that the Ash and Poplar to 1 are very strange hits that Konami has been doing for a long time. They're consistency hits, which I don't agree with because I think that if you're hitting a deck, you shouldn't be making it less enjoyable to play because you could just draw a bad hand that doesn't do anything. Like Poplar being drawn now is really bad because your Bonfire can't get a Poplar, and your Bonfire basically becomes a normal summon with Poplar in hand, and like Ash doesn't bring the Poplar. So it's a very awkward thing that can make your hands like really high and low rolly, which is not good. Like that's basically what happened to Tearlaments, where they lost so many names that it's basically just like a heavily luck-based deck at this point. So I don't like that, but for us, them being hit in this way and Apollousa being banned probably means that our main deck and side deck is going to be much more tuned for Tenpai and Yubel. That's my current guess. Now, Branded Fusion going to 1 is an irrelevant hit. This is basically not even a hit to Branded at all. And I don't know why they did this instead of just hitting Sanctifier or the Sanctifier targets, because those are the actual toxic things that stop you from being able to play. And this is probably the one deck that you auto lose to if you're still on breakers. So there's no Gimmick Puppet FTK, as far as I know, unless there's like another way to do it. And there's no Calamity FTK, but you can still lose to the Gimmick Puppet lock. I guess this doesn't impact the Runic build as much because you can still play off of Fountain, but I guess we'll just have to see, like, is it even worth preparing for Branded? Are there enough Brandeds in the meta that you would care about whether you're playing the Breaker version or not for that reason? Prosperity to 1 and Sanguine Summoning to 1, even though this removes 4 consistency cards from the Tenpai deck, these types of hits already existed in the OCG, and Tenpai is debatably their best deck. So I don't think that this really matters that much in terms of a tier list. I think that Tenpai could even replace Prosperity with Desires. Obviously that may be controversial because you may be on 1 Fadra, or you may go up to 2 because you're on Prosperity, and you'll have 1 Sanguine Summoning, but there are very easy ways to play around that. And I think that, you know, like, if you really were going to win or lose based on a Desires resolving, that Desires being ashed is also the same as a Prosperity that had to resolve for you to win being ashed. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens there, but I feel like Tenpai and Yubel with Spirit Gates going to 1 as the only hit are probably going to be the best decks. Grass, I don't know. I think that requires testing. Skill Drain is a bigger hit to White Forest variants than it is to other decks. Now, for the health of the game, Skill Drain should be hit, but for us, that's bad because that was one of the few cards that was not only broken, but it could be main decked by us, and we could turn it off whenever we wanted, just like Snake Eyes. We could even turn it off in the opponent's turn, off of like the Arciela Synchro or whatever. So that's unfortunate. I think that's also a big deal for the... You didn't have to main this in the Runic version, but it was pretty good in the Runic version. I think the Black Goat Laughs is functionally similar enough because it deals with monsters, especially in the grave. And I already like that card in White Forest because it's flex on the dice roll. So I feel like if you were playing Skill Drain in the main before, maybe you can just replace it with Black Goat. But yeah. In the semi-limited section, I don't think there's anything in here that's relevant. In the upcoming formats, we are going to have water support, and I think, although I haven't tested this myself, the title is actually relevant for Mermails, but I'm not sure if Mermails has enough space for there to be a lot of flex spots, so if they're meta relevant or not may depend on whether or not you can play a breaker build with them and not like lose to stuff in the meta. And maybe with Gimmick Puppet not being here and like Hot Red not being here, I don't know, maybe that deck will be worth thinking about. In the unlimited section, I don't think anything here is relevant for us either. There were some versions of the build that were playing Ancient Fairy Dragon, but you know, obviously it doesn't matter if that's at 1 or at 3, you'd still be doing the same type of thing. So overall, I think that this ban list was nowhere near as large or as impactful as most people wanted it to be. But the main takeaways are that Calamity decks and Gimmick Puppet stuff make the Breaker version of White Forest more playable. Skill Drain going to 1 from 3 is an unfortunate hit to our deck, but whatever. Prosperity to 1 is something that I think is a very, very, very good card, especially in the pure version of White Forest, but usually if you're mixing multiple other engines in, like both the toy stuff and Fiendsmith, or like Millennium cards or whatever, you didn't have space to play it, and then your extra deck banishes hurt more. But in a pure version, the Prosperity banishes don't really hurt that much, so I feel like if you were just on like a pure toy version of White Forest, then this probably does matter, especially if you were on breakers, but it's not that big of a deal for us. So anyhow, that's my take on the ban list so far. I think now we can finally start actually testing the Rage of the Abyss cards now that we know the ban list that we're going into. So expect more White Forest content from me in the future and more Azamina stuff and possibly other decks. So thanks for watching.